Let's talk to you about this now. Hundreds of British families are trialling a ban on social media for teenagers. The test is part of the government's debate on whether the UK should replicate Australia's decision to make social media illegal for under 16s to have access to social media sites. Well, let's speak to Jennifer Powers, founder and director of Unplugged Coalition, a non-profit aimed at limiting smartphone usage among children. Good to have you with us. Good to see you as well. Talk to me about your reaction to this trial that's going to take place. About 300 or so families, I believe.
Yes, well, I welcome the government's newfound interest in the impact that smartphones and social media are having on our children, but I'm a bit perplexed by this pilot and by the wider consultation the government has launched, because it seems to start with the premise that half measures, that gestures like increased support for parents to work the settings or time limits or even an overnight curfew might be sufficient to protect children and young people from the addictive by design nature of smartphones and these platforms. So a little bit puzzled.
The temptation is to cite Australia and say follow the path that Australia has set, which it did so only a few months ago. I guess some people might challenge that and say, well, we don't actually know how it's fully developed in Australia yet because it's a fairly new path. And is there merit to the government exploring options and doing trials and tests to see what does and doesn't work best? What's your response to the idea of maybe stress testing the various opportunities available and then developing a policy off the back of that?
I think it's a fantastic idea to learn from the Australian model and from what they're doing there and in other countries, but that's not what the pilot is. The pilot is looking at some half measures. The Australian model is not a ban on social media, even though I sometimes fall into the trap of using that word. It's actually putting an onus on the tech platforms not to give accounts to children. And I think that's a small and modest step that we can all get behind. It won't prevent children from being able to access the content on those platforms if they go via a browser. But you're right, we can learn. In Australia, it's already had a massive effect. I think there's more than 4 million accounts that have been deactivated since the start of the year and when it came into force. And hundreds of thousands of children that are coming of age in Australia who are not being allowed to have their own accounts on social media. But I think even more so than those numbers, the real impact in Australia and the real impact we could have here is the force of law and the force of regulation really helping to change the culture. You know, all the time we set social norms, we set rules about what's acceptable and what's safe for kids. And I really think we need to reset cultural norms to say that smartphones are devices for adults and these social media platforms are activity for adults. And I think it would really help to have regulations like this in place. So I hope the government goes further than the gestures in this pilot and in the consultation and brings in robust measures to protect our kids.
We've heard from parents, I've spoken to parents whose children aren't alive today because of the results of online activity, whether that's engaging in online challenges that have had deadly consequences and outcomes, whether that's being impacted by algorithms that have potentially fed them content that has led to deadly outcomes as well. But you also then hear from young people who maybe grow up in more isolated situations or communities, who maybe are gay, for example, who are looking to try and find the people that are like them, and it exposes the challenges that there are both benefits and also deadly at times consequences and severe consequences to social media. What is it for you, from your personal perspective, that concerns you about having young people online in the capacity to which they are now?
Yeah, and look, the letter that came out today is signed by 20 bereaved parents who have lost their children because of the horrific content online. It's just a tragedy, and it's very difficult to read that letter, but I encourage viewers to do so. But statistically speaking, that's not going to happen to, children in huge numbers, as horrific as it is. It's the everyday damage that social media is having on our kids, whether it's the worse mental health, whether it's them feeling lonelier, the bullying or the consumption of hardcore pornography and violent content, which is really desensitizing them to that content. And it's the fragmenting of their attention span. I mean, the internet is making all of us dumber, adults and kids. We know that from global IQ scores. So for me, it's really It's not. I'm not someone who says there are no joyful content, that there's no fun
Sure.
from being online. Of course there is. But in life there's always trade-offs. And whilst there are occasions when children or teens might really have a nice time and enjoy being online, I think as parents and as a society, we need to accept the responsibility and protect them. And so it's right that children learn about technology in school. It's right that they use it under supervised and semi-supervised environments at school, at home. But do I think children should have unrestricted, unlimited access to social media and the internet? No, I don't. And I think that's really a reasonable, modest position that, as we know,
Understood.
90 plus percentage of teachers support and most parents in the country support. So I feel like the government is really playing catch up with where the public is on this.
Jennifer Powers, founder, director of Unplugged Coalition. Good to have you with us. Appreciate you sharing.